Chapter 1. The Dawn of Fate. The year was 1878, and the early dawn sky over Paris glowed with hues of gold and violet, a harbinger of both promise and peril. High above the world, where the earth's breath no longer touched, the balloon Nimbus floated like a celestial orb, a fragile vessel cradled by the winds. 5 souls bound by fate and the unyielding pull of adventure soared within, their journey having only just begun. Inside the wicker basket, a small cramped world of leather straps, brass instruments, and murmured prayers, the passengers wrestled with their own demons as they ascended ever higher. The thin air seemed to carry not only their weight, but also the invisible burden of their ambitions and secrets. The captain, Eten Maron, the veteran aeronaut and the balloon's captain, stood at the helm, though there was no wheel to steer this craft. His grizzled face bore the lines of countless flights and battles with nature itself. To him, the sky was both mistress and adversary, a vast expanse that offered no mercy to the weak. Yet he had a deeper reason for this flight. A rumor whispered among the secret societies of Paris that the sky itself held answers to questions not yet asked. As the balloon crested above the morning clouds, he glanced at the horizon, his mind drifting back to a parchment he found in a dusty library, a map of the skies, marked with symbols he could scarcely understand. It hinted at a place where the air thinned to nothingness, where one might touch the edge of eternity. The scientist, Dr. Alara Voss. Dr. Alara Voss, a scientist whose passion for the unknown had driven her from the confines of her laboratory to the limitless sky, adjusted her instruments with precise, practiced movements. She was the only woman aboard, a rare position in a time when science was considered a man's domain. Her peers had mocked her when she proposed this flight, claiming that the human body could not survive the heights she intended to reach. But she was not only driven by curiosity, she was haunted by a dream. For months the same vision had visited her sleep, a distant star, burning a bright cold blue, surrounded by a ring of darkness. It called to her with a voice that was not a voice, pulling her upward, into the thin air where life and death danced closely. She believed that in reaching the uppermost layers of the atmosphere, she might find some trace of this star, some hint of the cosmic truths that had eluded mankind for millennia. The nobleman, Marquee Henry de Ro, leaning against the edge of the basket, Marquee Henry de Ro, a man of noble birth but ignoble reputation, gazed down at the world below, his heart heavy with a sorrow he could not escape. Once a celebrated figure in the salons of Paris, his fortune and status had crumbled under the weight of scandal. He was fleeing not in fear, but in the hope that the sky might offer him absolution, or perhaps oblivion. But Henry's motives were not entirely pure. Hidden within his coat was a letter, crumpled and worn, sent from an anonymous source. It spoke of a treasure hidden in the heavens, something more valuable than gold or jewels, something that could restore him to his former glory, or so he believed. The stowaway, Jules Caron. Unbeknownst to the others, a 4th passenger crouched silently in the shadows, a young stowaway named Jules Caron. Orphaned and homeless, Jules had spent most of his life in the back alleys of Paris, surviving by his wits and his quick hands. He had not intended to board the Nimbus, but fate had drawn him to the launch site, where a careless moment and a desperate leap had landed him aboard. Now, as the ground disappeared beneath him, Jules wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. But there was no turning back. He had heard stories of treasure hunters, madmen who sought riches in the skies, and he had imagined that this flight might be his ticket to a better life. If only he could stay hidden long enough to find his opportunity. The mysterious passenger, the stranger. And then there was the 5th passenger, a man known only as the stranger. He had appeared at the launch site just before dawn, paying a princely sum for passage aboard the Nimbus. Wrapped in a dark cloak, his face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, he spoke little and revealed nothing of his purpose. But as the balloon climbed higher, a strange tension began to fill the air. The stranger would often gaze into the distance, his eyes focused on something only he could see. Occasionally, he would pull a small, weathered book from his coat and mutter words in an ancient language, words that seemed to resonate with the very air around them. Chapter 2. The Edge of the World. As the hours passed and the balloon drifted into the upper atmosphere, the world below became a distant memory. The air grew thin, and the sky darkened to a deep indigo, the stars beginning to emerge even as the sun still hovered on the horizon. Etienne felt a shiver run down his spine, not from the cold, but from a sense of foreboding. The instruments began to malfunction, spinning wildly or stopping altogether. Alara's breath quickened as she scribbled notes, her eyes wide with both fear and exhilaration. This was the moment she had waited for, the moment when the known world gave way to the unknown. But something was wrong. The stranger, who had remained silent for most of the journey, suddenly stepped forward. His voice, when he spoke, was low and commanding, a voice that carried the weight of authority. "We are not alone," he said, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the first stars of evening shimmered like distant lanterns. Henry scoffed, but there was a tremor in his voice. "What do you mean? There's no one here but us." The stranger turned to face them, his expression unreadable. "This is a place where the veil between worlds is thin. We are being watched, and our presence here is noticed." Jules, hidden in the shadows, felt his heart pound in his chest. He had heard stories of spirits and demons, of ancient gods who ruled the skies, but those were just tales, weren't they? Etienne tried to regain control, but the balloon began to rock violently, as if caught in a storm that none of them could see. The temperature plummeted, and frost formed on the ropes and the edges of the basket. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the rocking stopped. The air was deathly still, and the sky above them was black as night, though the sun still lingered on the edge of the horizon. Alara gasped as she looked up, her voice a whisper of awe and terror. Look! Above them, in the darkened sky, a star burned with a cold blue light, brighter than any they had ever seen. It was the star from her dreams, the star that had called her to this place. The stranger nodded, his eyes reflecting the light of the star. "We have arrived," he said, his voice barely audible over the sound of their own breathing. And then the star began to move. Chapter 3. The Descent into Madness. Panic gripped the passengers as the balloon began to rise uncontrollably, drawn upwards as if by an unseen force. Etienne struggled with the controls, but it was no use. The Nimbus was no longer under his command. Alara clutched her instruments, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of the impossible. The star above them was growing larger, its light pulsating like the heartbeat of a dying god. But it was not just light. It was a presence, a mind, ancient and unfathomable, reaching out to touch them. Henry screamed, his composure shattered as he realized that the treasure he sought was nothing but a cruel joke, a lure that had drawn him into a trap from which there was no escape. Jules, his small body trembling with fear, prayed silently to a god he wasn't sure existed, begging for mercy. The stranger remained calm, his eyes locked on the star. "This is not the end," he said softly. "It is only the beginning." And then, with a sound like thunder, the star exploded, its light engulfing the Nimbus and its passengers in a blinding flash. To the return. Days later, the wreckage of the Nimbus was found scattered across a remote forest near Arcachon. The balloon was torn and battered, its once proud form reduced to a twisted mass of fabric and metal. Of the 5 passengers, only one was found alive. Jules Caron, the stowaway, was discovered lying in the wreckage, unconscious but miraculously unhurt. He could not remember what had happened after the star's explosion when he awoke. Once sharp and cunning, his mind was now clouded with a strange fog, and he spoke only in whispers of a cold blue light and a voice that had spoken to him in the darkness. The others were not found on that day. In the following years, stories of the Nimbus and its mysterious voyage became the stuff of legend, whispered in hushed tones by those who dared to speak of such things. Some claimed that the star had taken the passengers and transported them to another world or another time. Others believed that they had perished in the skies, their souls trapped forever in the thin air where the Earth's breath no longer touched. But the truth, whatever it was, remained a mystery. And as for the star, it never appeared in the sky again. Or perhaps it did, just not in the way anyone expected.